Under the cover of a silent night, in the secluded Chong estate, a drama unfolded that could break even the most resilient. Within these walls, where hope flickered, someone bent over the cradle with anxious tenderness, looking at the tiny arms and legs of a newborn. But mournful sighs and the silent question, "How could this be?" hung in the air, like harbingers of inevitable disaster. After all, the doctor brought terrible news. The baby, so defenseless and innocent, was not destined to live to be 20. The head of the estate, Jung Dae-hyun, gritted his teeth, his face contorted with bitterness and anger at the fate that had taken his wife from him and was now threatening his son. The wise healer merely shook his head, unable to hide his disapproval. How can one utter such words in the presence of a doctor? Flashed through his thoughts. And then, in words addressed to his unfortunate father, "And how can you speak so dismissively of your own child, who is destined to die so early?" he asked, while the baby babbled peacefully. The cause of the misfortune was clear to the healer. 9 yin meridians were torn, and the main acupuncture point, Bai Hui, located on the crown of the head, was open to the limit. This, the doctor explained with a gesture of despair, was the fatal anomaly that predicted a short life. People call this the ascension of the deity, were the words that Dae-hyun refused to believe, considering them to be nothing more than nonsense that only applied to powerful Taoists. But the doctor persisted, pointing to his head. Even absolute martial arts masters who use the upper meridian use the Bai Hui point. True ascension of the deity is when the body cannot withstand the too powerful flow of energy from heaven and earth, and the person simply dies, unable to withstand such a force. While the father absorbed every word with grim concentration, the baby seemed to be completely serene in his cradle. Jung Dae-hyun turned away abruptly, trying to escape the hard truth, to turn away from the child who had become a reminder of pain. "I see," he said bitterly. "Apparently this is still a heavenly punishment. How dare you call yourself a father after this?" The healer's unspoken cry of pain was cut off by Dae-hyun's indifferent voice ordering him to leave. With a heavy heart and full of contempt, the doctor, whose help had been rejected, left the estate, his footsteps echoing dully in the night. If fate had been kinder to him, he could have become a heavenly demon, or mastered the 72 elite techniques of Shaolin, he lamented. But here this boy is just an unwanted fruit. He will die young in this forgotten place, never having had a chance to live, the healer thought as the camera moved forward, showing the Chan estate decades later. Decades later, the Chong estate still sparkled with lights, but the joy now had a new face. The clan leader, cup in hand, looked with pride at his eldest son, who had followed in the footsteps of his ancestors by joining the powerful Zhongnan sect. The estate rejoiced. Congratulations poured in from all sides, praising the success of the offspring. "This is worth a drink," thundered the chief's voice, raising the cup into the air. However, amidst the general merriment, only one person looked around, his gaze searching for the one who was missing from the table. The empty space, the chair thrown into the shadows, spoke more eloquently than any words about another son. "Father, where is young Shin?" came a timid question, breaking the idyll. "He's been ordered to remain on the training ground," the chief snapped, not allowing any argument. "His presence could bring trouble," he said coolly, taking a sip from his cup. "Such a joyful occasion is no place for his shadow." The words sounded like a sentence, and those who would have dared to object lowered their eyes, resigned to the harsh truth. Meanwhile, far from the festive tables, the halls of the training ground shone with an unearthly light. The young man, with his eyes closed, concentrated the energy that flowed from his very soul, transforming into an icy breath. Every muscle tensed, every breath echoed as he rose, surrounded by a whirlwind of power. Suddenly, his eyes flew open, a fire of determination blazing in them, piercing the darkness. And at that moment, all the air around him exploded into icy shards, announcing the birth of something new. The white fog settled, and on the ground there remained only traces of destruction, witnesses to its unprecedented power. "Finally," he whispered, looking at his palms, shrouded in a blue glow. "I have mastered the art of movement of the Chong clan." The fist clenched like fate itself, holding tightly to the newfound power. Behind him, like an invisible guard, stood the silhouette of an unbending ancestor, looking approvingly at his descendant. "The art of movement," Young Shin said thoughtfully, knowing that his path was only just beginning. Young Shin proudly explained to his older brother how he had achieved this using the clan's techniques. The elder, looking at him, thoughtfully said his name. A mixture of anxiety and pride could be seen in his eyes. With a slight sigh, he warned Young Shin that he should be careful with his discoveries. "It would be better if no one knew about this," the brother added, noticing the bewilderment on Young Shin's face. But then the elder intervened in the conversation, his voice full of indignation and warning. "If you die from an energy deviation, who will take responsibility for your insolence?" he asked angrily. The elder, growing angry, accused Young Shin of encroaching on the sacred clan knowledge, comparing him to a madman. Stunned by the torrent of accusations, Young Shin froze, his gaze becoming completely empty. Without saying a word, he slowly turned his back and walked away, leaving behind anger and misunderstanding. Finding solitude on a simple bench, Young Shin tried to comprehend the weight of the expectations and restrictions placed upon him. At that moment, the silhouettes of his family appeared before his inner gaze, like a bright, distant echo of lost happiness. Suddenly, the noise of voices pulled him out of his thoughts. Other students, full of anticipation, were hurrying somewhere. "Where is this all going?" he whispered, and immediately received an answer about the upcoming visit of masters from the Zhongnan sect. Mighty warriors, masters of ancient arts, seemed the embodiment of strength and grace against the backdrop of mountain peaks. Young Shin's gaze, full of hidden longing, turned to the horizon, to where true power was made. But the cruel reality quickly brought him back. He was forbidden to appear before guests, for his birth had cost his mother her life. It was an order from the chief, his own father, and the knowledge of it burned into Young Shin's soul. The servant bowed low and spoke words of apology, but they only increased the heaviness in the young man's heart. Young Shin's gaze became distant, and he slowly walked away, his footsteps echoing the loneliness in the spacious corridors. Behind them, there remained a whisper, wondering about the great masters who would honor their clan with their presence today. As Young Shin walked away, the voices around him grew louder, the anticipation growing. And then, from afar, a procession appeared, led by a sedate man whose appearance radiated strength and authority. Exclamations swept through the courtyard. "They have arrived, the masters!" The martial artists from the legendary Zhongnan sect finally graced them with their presence. Among them, one figure stood out, whose smooth movements and aura were like a breath of wind. Each step she took was light, like a dance, and an unearthly radiance flowed around her. Golden strands of hair shimmered in the sun, framing barely visible but graceful ears. A gasp of astonishment ran through the crowd, and many faces were distorted in silent question. Before them stood a representative of the noble race, whose appearance was the embodiment of an ancient legend. Even Young Shin froze, trying to comprehend that in front of him was a mythical creature, the kind only whispered about in old books. The aura emanating from her was so powerful and pure that it made everyone around her feel insignificant. She smiled softly, and the gesture broke the shackles of numbness caused by her divine presence. The clan leader, Jung Dae-hyun, hurriedly stepped forward, his voice trembling with excitement and respect. He introduced himself, trying to maintain his dignity, but there was undisguised awe in his eyes. In response, the noble race representative Ye-il-shin, the elder of the Zhongnan sect, slightly bowed her head. These words came out of the blue, leaving everyone in shock. Falling prostrate, the people begged for forgiveness for their insolence. But Ye-il-shin only gently stopped them. The head of the clan, having barely recovered, continued to apologize, ashamed of his ignorance. Young Shin watched this with an almost unreadable expression, questions about Ye-il-shin's age and strength swirling in his mind. Under the respectful gaze of the noble race elder, she followed the clan leader, leaving behind a trail of mystery and admiration. Her steps, so confident a moment ago, suddenly stopped. Among the crowd paying respects, someone pointed out a young man bowing deeply. A glint of curiosity flashed in her eyes as she turned her gaze to the young man. Young Shin, standing next to him, met this gaze with slight bewilderment. He greeted the elder with a restrained but deep bow, observing all formalities. The elder's eyes widened in sudden realization, looking from the one who pointed to Young Shin. The head of the clan proudly introduced him, declaring him his third son. The wise elder noted his exceptionality, calling him an unusually insightful child. The clan leader quickly apologized for his manners, but the elder's voice only contained a question full of hidden meaning. Ignoring the whispers, Young Shin slowly walked away, lost in his own thoughts. In the clan shrine, his hand rested on the hilt of his sword, and in his thoughts there was an echo of new hope, born after meeting the masters of Zhongnan. He drew his blade from its sheath, recalling the long years of wandering in search of a path to development after mastering the arts of the Chan clan. His gaze, sharp as steel, fell on the blade, where a determined gleam was reflected. Under the crimson rays of the setting sun, a new goal took shape in his mind, improving his swordsmanship. Meanwhile, other clan members discussed the splendor and potential of their new home. However, this beauty also concealed a danger, for such a concentration of earthly energy would inevitably attract greedy glances, especially from the tyrant Sword Clan. The elder, sipping her tea, was aware of the inevitability of the coming threat and the grim prospect of sacrifices necessary for survival. Less far-sighted warriors proposed a daring preemptive strike, not realizing the true power of the enemy. The elder's gaze, full of wisdom and weariness, expressed only a quiet hope for the impossible. The cup of tea froze in her hand as her thoughts wandered to the ancient tales of the 13 heavens and their inevitable fate. It was no coincidence that the instructions stated that the Tyrant Sword Clan was the most problematic group. And while the servants listened to her orders not to lose their vigilance and keep their sword at the ready, she herself, taking a slow sip, seemed to distance herself from the current moment. The image of that boy who was so strikingly different from the others stood in her thoughts like an obsession. Meanwhile, under cover of night, secret work continued in one of the monasteries. The young man sat in meditation, his body enveloped in a shimmering blue light, a sign of deep immersion. Suddenly, the flow of energy above his head intensified, causing confusion. He tried to understand why the Bai Hui point had opened so suddenly, since he had not meditated for a whole year, honing the technique of the Chong clan. But instead of answers, the power of the energy piercing the head only grew, becoming threatening. His body rose slightly, but his consciousness was already desperately clinging to reality, foreshadowing imminent loss. Realization pierced him like a blade of ice. Less than 5 years to live if this uncontrollable flow did not stop. That was what he was facing. Fear filled him, forcing him to cover his face with his hands. The creaking of the door broke the silence of the night. He decisively left his abode. His footsteps echoed through the yard as he walked out into the night. Suddenly he froze. His gaze darted upwards and then sharply downwards. Something had disturbed the peace. Instantly, his face contorted in tension, every nerve tingling with a premonition of disaster. From the side where the crimson glow was burning, an ominous energy was blowing, and he felt it with his whole being. Without thinking, he jumped up, his hand already on the hilt of his sword. With every step, the smell of blood became more distinct, foreshadowing a terrible picture. The silence that reigned was too deep, too unnatural, foreshadowing something terrible. But as soon as he approached the door, an ominous scarlet glow poured from within, and suddenly he realized, a moment later he was thrown back, surrounded by a whirlwind of energy. The formation's insidious trap had worked. He landed hard, feeling not just the ground under his feet, but something wet and sticky. His eyes widened in disbelief, and his heart sank in horror as the nightmare scene unfolded before him. The entire estate was covered in blood, and dozens of motionless bodies lay around him, like puppets thrown by a cruel hand. Rage flared in his eyes. How could he have been so blind as to not notice such a horrific atrocity at the Chan estate? Step by step, stunned and angry, he followed the trail of the massacre. Every rustle seemed like the cry of the dead. His gaze fell on another mutilated body, and a thought struck him. Was it this damned trap that was the cause of it all? The faces of the dead were distorted by a final grimace of horror, their eyes frozen, reflecting unbearable agony. All the dead were from the Chong clan, that was undeniable. Just how powerful were those who committed this monstrous act? At that moment, he noticed movement among the dead. He heard a stupid chuckle. One of the killers, indifferently walking over the bodies, said, "If you managed to survive, you should have hidden instead of showing yourself." Another added, pointing his sword at him, "He chose his own fate. Finish him off." In response to their words, the young man only closed his lips, his gaze becoming icy. "I heard the order, boy," the killer hissed, raising his hand to strike. "Sorry, nothing personal." But in response, the young man only clenched his fist tighter, and a mysterious golden glow flared up in it. He instantly dodged the deadly blow, his hand seeming to absorb the entire force of the attack. He grabbed his enemy's wrist with an iron grip, like lightning piercing flesh. The assassin howled in pain, his hand burning with the touch of a power far older and more powerful than his blade. He grabbed his enemy's wrist with an iron grip, like lightning piercing flesh. The assassin howled in pain, his hand burning with the touch of a power far older and more powerful than his blade. Flames of unbearable agony consumed his limb as the rest of his attackers watched in stupefaction. And there he stood, amidst the bloody chaos, the source of this unearthly energy, shrouded in light, serene and menacing. "Who are you?" One of the bandits' voices rang through the air, filled with horror and disbelief. And the voice that answered was cold as steel, but echoed through thousands of years. "I am the third son of the clan leader." His gaze, piercing and inexorable, made one shudder, foreshadowing the inevitable retribution. Beneath his feet, which had seemed ordinary only a moment ago, energy now flared and crackled, preparing for the next step. The defeated enemy, having gathered the last of his strength, tried to rise, a thirst for revenge burning in his eyes. "Bastard!" A furious cry burst from his throat, but it was too late. In a momentary jerk, the hero's blade, shining with azure light, pierced the body, leaving only a ghostly trace. The blow was so fast that the expression of surprise and pain on the enemy's face froze without having time to change. He moved like a whirlwind, elusive and merciless, his sword dancing a deadly dance. Every movement was calculated to perfection. Every swing of the blade carried with it an inescapable fate. The rest of the attackers froze, their faces distorted by the realization of the greatness and antiquity of the force before them. Like a ghostly shadow, he moved on to the next one, and again a flash of light marked the end. Panic gripped them as they saw their comrades fall one after another, unable to even strike back. He became the embodiment of lightning, masterfully dodging and counterattacking, striking down multiple opponents in an instant. Their futile attempts to repel his attacks only delayed their inevitable end, their blades whistling uselessly through the air. In a single graceful movement, he rushed through their ranks, leaving behind only silence and bodies cooling on the blood-soaked floor. His blade plunged in with surgical precision, cutting off his opponent's last desperate breath. Eyes full of horror froze, reflecting the last moments of fading life. Yoo Ji-hyuk's face remained impassive, only a slight tension betraying his concentration on the task. The sword slipped from the flesh, leaving behind a fountain of scarlet blood that splashed onto the clothes. Each of his blows was a sentence, each flash of the blade a harbinger of imminent death for those who dared to stand in his way. The warrior towered over the fallen, his eyes filled with cold, calculating strength. Silence fell over the courtyard, broken only by the occasional drops of blood falling on the stones. Closing his eyes, he analyzed every movement, every reaction, noting hidden potential. A drop of blood slid from the blade, completing his first deadly lesson with the blade that felt like an extension of his soul. He opened his eyes, and a spark of self-satisfaction flashed in their depths. The training had gone better than expected, but the moment of solitude was interrupted. New figures appeared on the horizon, their faces distorted by what they saw. One of them, with a smirk on his lips, dismissed the tragedy, considering the fallen to be merely victims of his own carelessness. Yoo Ji-hyuk looked at the uninvited guests, a silent question in his gaze, a harbinger of new danger. However, among them there were those who could not hide their amazement at seeing such power in such a young warrior. The warrior, without losing his vigilance, turned to them, trying to find out their affiliation, their true intentions. One of the arrivals pointed with cold nonchalance to the bodies at his feet, clarifying that these were not their people. Then, with a hint of superiority, he introduced himself, identifying himself as a member of the Tyrant Sword Clan. The name of the Tyrant Sword Clan echoed in Yoo Ji-hyuk's mind, causing him to connect the two warring forces. He wondered what had brought two powerful clans here at once, but received only arrogant disdain in response. But a slight, barely noticeable smile played on his lips, as if he had already unraveled the thread of intrigue that shrouded this place. But instead of answering directly, the stranger decided to test his strength. The pause dragged on, hanging in the air like a harbinger of a storm, and then a name was heard that would make the hearts of many tremble: the Desert Fortress, one of the greatest sects in Murim. With that name came a warning. Even if he won, the price would be high. But at that very moment, the air exploded, torn apart by a blinding flash of ki. One of the attackers was thrown back, his body falling limply to the ground. The hero's eyes burned with determination, not flinching in the face of the enemy. The defeated fighter's face showed disbelief mixed with a bloody cough. Suddenly, like a whirlwind, another figure appeared, graceful and deadly. Her blade sang in the air, cutting through space with frightening ease. The calm on her face was deceptive. Underneath it lay a murderous power. The name that escaped the hero's lips echoed in his head: Elder Yo Il-shin. She moved faster than thought, her every movement honed to perfection. The blade seemed to be an extension of her will, an obedient instrument of death. But even the sword goddess, as she was called, was not invulnerable. Blood stained her clothes. Who then was the true enemy? If even the strongest fell one after another, the tension was mounting, and there was a deep, almost painful look in his eyes. He turned around abruptly, his gaze fixed on something beyond the visible. Fear and realization froze in the elder's eyes, as if she saw an abyss. And in the midst of this chaos, he stood, surrounded by an aura of incredible power, ready to take on the challenge. Who is this? His gaze silently asks, in which anxiety and bewilderment are mixed. The gaze slides over a figure that appeared from the shadows, dressed in dark clothes, with a sword at the ready. exuding something ancient and menacing. His face remains in the semi-darkness, but a coldness emanates from it that can freeze the very blood. His presence thickens the air, and the hearts of those present clench under the weight of an unbearable, ominous energy. The man's eye glows with a ghostly fire, and this one look is enough to make the world around him go dark. Every thought, every resistance dissolves under this gaze, leaving only numbness and horror. And then one of the fallen, trembling, whispers a name that echoes throughout the ruined courtyard. Clan leader. Those around him fall on their faces, recognizing the power of the one who only a moment ago was an unknown enemy. He is a ruler whose will is unbreakable, and whose name inspires awe and fear. It was he, the ruler of the Tyrant Sword Clan, part of the 13 Heavens, the harbinger of disaster in the Jianghu, the legend itself made flesh. Our hero is stunned, realizing the full scale of the impending threat. Blood on the ground is evidence of recent atrocities, and hoarse groans are a reminder of pain. Taking a breath, he gathers his last strength, not allowing the horror to consume him. Well, come what may, he decides, and the ground beneath his feet splits with determination. A swift dash like lightning piercing the darkness, and he rushes towards the inevitable. Surprise on the face of one of his close associates, while the clan head himself only slightly bows his head, watching the desperate attack. The sword in the fighter's hand sparkles, cutting through the air, heading towards the target. A moment of confusion, and the blade is already rushing towards you, leaving no chance to think. A scream is heard, and a scarlet fountain of blood confirms that the blow has hit its mark. The elder's eyes widen in shock as she sees the tragedy unfolding before her, blood staining her as well. In this chaos, where every blow could be the last, the young man in red seems to be the center of the storm. Scarlet blood clouds the vision, but the hero's gaze does not lose its sharpness, only grows brighter. He looks his opponent straight in the eye, and in that look, there is a challenge that surpasses fear. Will you kill me after this? The words hang in the air like a sentence. Rage flares on the faces of the survivors. They are ready to tear the impudent madman to pieces. But a commanding voice belonging to a man in dark robes suddenly interrupts the growing storm. His words cut like a sword, asserting the youth's superiority over everyone present. The truth rings like thunder. This young fighter's skill surpasses any of their ranks. Even the elder, who has seen much, is shocked by this statement, realizing its weight. Indignation and shock overwhelm the others, because their pride is hurt by such glorification of the brat. But the gentleman in dark robes was unwavering. He decided to save the young man's life. The hero, accustomed to battles and not to mercy, throws down a return challenge. His hand confidently grips the hilt of the sword, as if preparing for the next turn of fate. Blood runs down his blade as he pulls it from his fallen enemy, looking up at his patron. And then he reveals his true identity. He is the only grandson of the former commander of the legendary Divine Sword Squad. The elder freezes, shocked to the depths of his soul by this sudden revelation. The grandson of the commander of the best squad of the desert fortress, created by the imperial family itself. To tangle with such power is to doom oneself, and the Lord in the Dark knows this. But the reason for his decision goes deeper than just respect for his name or origin. I like you, he says, and the words sound like the final chord in an unexpected melody. Your character and spirit are the true foundation of a great martial artist in Jianghu, he confidently states, looking at Yongxin. And with a slight note of regret, he adds that he would have taken him as a student if not for the bonds of the desert fortress. These words hang in the air like a thunderclap, causing shock and numbness in everyone around. But the time for pompous speeches has passed, and Jinpun tightly grips the hilt of his blade. With a sharp, thunderous sound, he plunges the sword straight into the ground, delimiting space. It is not just a blade. It is an indestructible boundary created by his will, pulsating with mystical energy. From now on, no clan, no sect will dare to set foot on this land, is his categorical ultimatum. Jinpun and his comrades begin their slow, confident retreat, leaving the battlefield behind. But he suddenly stops, casting one last piercing glance over his shoulder. I will always be glad to fight you, he promises, full of undisguised challenge, and adding the last phrase, as if paving the way for future retribution, find me when you're ready for revenge. Yongxin freezes, thinking about these words that could become his new meaning in life. Jinpun's group finally disappears beyond the gate, leaving behind only silence and dead bodies. Among the fallen, surrounded by chaos and blood, Yongxin feels the unbearable weight of what has happened. The shadow of the departed mighty warrior still looms over him, foreshadowing the trials to come. And suddenly a groan full of despair and pain escapes from the hero's chest. It is the father, bleeding to death, his last breaths barely audible in the deathly silence. Father, this is Yongxin. the hero whispers, clinging to his beloved body, trying to hold on to the slipping life. Why? Just one question filled with hopelessness bursts from the chest. And with his last bit of strength, the father looks up, asking the crucial, piercing question. Why are you so strong? How did you do it? His gaze, full of pain and misunderstanding, seeks the answer to the most terrible question. Chun, with a barely noticeable smile, calmly confirms that he not only took over the power, but surpassed it. At this moment, shock, disbelief, and anger are mixed with pain. The father's voice shakes the room, accusing his son of sacrilege and pride. But Chun only stares back, his eyes revealing only a deep, incomprehensible sadness. And suddenly, through the haze of agony, the father remembers how long ago this began. With every drop of blood that runs down his chin, he realizes the truth he has denied for so long. The sacred art that the clan was proud of turned out to be not a gift from their ancestors, but the creation of his own son. A tear slowly trickling down a wrinkled cheek washes away anger, leaving only bitterness and remorse. The father admits his blindness and cruelty, realizing the greatness of the one he always despised. In a final gesture of forgiveness and acceptance, his trembling hand covers his son's, and he whispers words that Chun never hoped to hear, words of recognition and legacy. The depths of Chun's blue eyes reflect an eternity full of unspoken emotions. For the last time, the father looks at his third son, trying to capture this image forever. And with this name on his lips, he leaves, his eyelids closing forever. Chun, leaning over his father, holds his hand, feeling the warmth of life leave. The second brother, overcome with grief, rushes to his dying father, his cry breaking the silence. Chun presses his palm to his father's chest, as if trying to hold on to his slipping soul. They bow over his father's body in grief. But Chun stands like a frozen statue, his face inscrutable. At this moment, new figures appear, their faces distorted with anxiety, foreshadowing new trials for the orphaned clan. They bow over their father's body in grief, while Chun stands like a frozen statue, his face impassive. At this moment, new figures appear, their faces distorted with worry, foreshadowing new trials for the orphaned clan. An alarming question hangs in the air, and a cautious but confident answer sounds. The girl is only immersed in an artificial sleep. It was a desperate measure to hide her from the bloodthirsty thugs, whose hands were stained with blood. A grim determination freezes on Chun's face, every muscle betraying suppressed pain and readiness for something inevitable. Amidst this carnage, the departing warrior gives his final instructions. Little Hai must enter the Zhongnan sect, as her unique connection with the five elements grants her a special status. The young man's voice is tinged with despair as he asks about the fate of the one who is still able to stand. But the answer was short and unwavering. He would take care of himself. At that moment, as if from another world, a new figure appears, its voice sounding like a thin bell in the silence. Before them appears a woman whose appearance radiates unearthly calm and mysterious strength. Under the moonlight that pours through the gaps, she confirms her imminent departure, which brooks no delay. The shadow of the tyrant sword sect's leader looming over them demands that Zhongnan be notified immediately, as their future is at stake. She turns to Chun, her question piercing him. Does he intend to seek refuge in his mother's forgotten fortress? His words ring with bitterness. The world he knew no longer offers him a path to improvement. But there is a glimmer of hope in her eyes as she suggests that there is another, far more worthy path. Chun's thoughts are confused. The offer from the elder of the great sect is an unheard of honor, but her true desire is much deeper. She wants to see him as an adept of the head of the sect himself. His eyes flash, reflecting the inner storm raging within, anticipation and challenge. Behind the heroes, mere mortals cannot believe their ears, their faces distorted with shock. A follower of the sect leader? The question echoes, and it seems even the stars freeze in anticipation of the answer. Her gaze is full of confidence as she asserts that he is capable of such a path, that he is worthy of this honor. He becomes immersed in thoughts of the greatness and sacred arts that are only accessible to a direct disciple of sect leader Zhongnan. Overwhelmed with gratitude, he bows his head, promising not to forget the kindness shown to him. But another thought is already brewing in his heart, and then this thought bursts out, interrupting the solemnity of the moment with an unexpected apology, causing those around to freeze in surprise. A barely noticeable, almost weightless smile touches the lips of the head of the sect, revealing a hidden understanding of what is happening. With a gentle smile, she brushes aside his apologies, as if she had foreseen this move, and shares her vision. He is talented, and a man many would desire. After accepting his formal repentance, She reaffirms her openness, assuring him that the doors of the Zhongnan sect are always open to him. Hao Tian's gaze became serious. He collected his thoughts, preparing for the decisive step. He looks at her, acknowledging her wisdom and the antiquity of her line among the noble races, preparing to ask the question that will change everything. Then, with unwavering determination, he speaks words that pierce the silence. Does she know how to obtain the fruits of the world tree? Her eyes widen in shock when the tree's name leaves his lips, and there is a silent question in her gaze. Would he really dare to do such a thing? The great world tree appears before his inner gaze, guarded by the legendary head of the desert fortress, equal to the emperor himself. A luminous fruit appears in the imagination, emitting a mysterious radiance, the key to unimaginable power and immortality. He realizes that this fruit can grant him not only a long life, but also a chance to rewrite the predetermined fate that was so cruelly cut short in the past. She, with slight sadness, admits that her own powers have no power over the world tree, for she has not lived even half of her allotted time. But there is hope. The head of the desert fortress is the one who holds the key to this riddle, capable of granting what he desires. The decision is made. Hao Tian announces his journey to the desert fortress, to which she warns of the incredible difficulty of this task. After all, this fruit is not just an artifact. It is a sacred relic that even noble races treat with reverence. And he understands that his only chance to get closer to this goal is to become the commander of the divine sword squad and perform great feats. Nodding in agreement, the sect leader takes up his sword, expressing support for his dangerous yet noble choice. It was time for her to go and inform her sect of what had happened, leaving Hao Tian alone with his new obligations. As she leaves, her men, the swordmaster and apprentice, remain to assist him here, and Hao Tian stands with his fists clenched tightly, his gaze fixed on the future. Dawn dawned on the ancient lands, illuminating the path to new horizons and responsibilities. Hao Tian, tightly gripping the hilt of his sword, once again turned to his companions, thanking them for their help. The former clan members were quick to dismiss his words, acknowledging that the land was now rightfully his. It was difficult for them to accept their share of the blame for the tragedy that had occurred, which weighed heavily on their hearts. Hao Tian, sensing their regret, quietly said Yang Xin's name, as if addressing his conscience. Yang Xin stood before him, clutching the little girl to him, his face reflecting deep remorse. He understood that no apology could make up for all the horror and pain Hao Tian had experienced. Hao Tian, with a warm smile, promised the child to become a good older brother to him, hoping that everything would be fine. The elders encouraged the young student, urging him to train as if his life depended on it. Hao Tian's gaze was fixed forward, filled with determination in the face of inevitable difficulties. Little Hai-Ah, with wide eyes, spoke tenderly to Yang Xin, as if anticipating their separation. And Hao Tian, in turn, addressed Yang Xin with one last instruction: to protect the girl at all costs. One of the elders respectfully addressed Hao Tian, asking about his future plans. Hao Tian revealed that he was going to take care of the scattered branches of the Chong clan scattered throughout Nanyang. He himself, as was known, went to the desert fortress, expressing hope for future meetings. The elders, knowing of his skill, were confident that the chief courtier would cope with any challenge. Meanwhile, Yang Xin accepted the elders' instructions, silently promising to fulfill his new duty. Hao Tian turned around, a faint, almost ghostly smile appearing on his face, wishing everyone to take care of themselves. The elder only nodded, his gaze full of mixed feelings, the sadness of farewell and quiet hope. And Hao Tian took his first step towards the unknown, leaving behind the ruins of the past. The elder merely nodded in farewell, his gaze filled with mixed emotions, the sadness of farewell and quiet hope. And Hao Tian took his first step toward the unknown, leaving behind the ruins of the past. He pondered the elder's words, trying to understand their true meaning. With every step he took, he moved further and further away from the only home he knew and the people who had become his family. Under the cover of night, an unfamiliar world full of bustle and lights spread out before him. The city greeted him with a bustling life, illuminated by the subdued light of the evening lanterns. In one of the taverns, he saw a bustle. People were laughing and drinking, their voices echoing throughout the hall. Having climbed up to the second floor, he received his modest luggage, which contained all his earthly belongings. Beyond the balcony stretched a panorama of the city at night, where every light hid its own story. Breathing in the fresh night air, he said to himself, "I'm finally here," feeling the anticipation of something new. His gaze swept over the city, and he recognized the grandeur of the desert fortress he had heard so much about. The inn's neighbors, oblivious to him, were discussing how many people had arrived here from all over the Central Plain. They complained about the reigning chaos, since even the martial arts masters who came for the entrance exams preferred to drink themselves into oblivion. The mention of entrance exams caught him off guard. Had he really missed something? A young man who called himself Hong Wan Chan approached him. Their gazes met, and a spark of new acquaintance hung in the air. Hong Wan Chan, a little embarrassed, apologized for his impatience, admitting that he rarely meets someone younger than himself. He introduced himself, adding that he had come from distant Shanxi. In response, Hao Tian identified himself as Chong Yong Xin, introducing himself as a native of Xinyi County. With a slight smile, he raised the bowl to his lips and sipped the strong drink. His new acquaintance leaned back in his chair, teasing him that the journey must not have been difficult at all. But just a moment ago, this calm traveler was a whirlwind of death, leaving behind only horror and a death rattle. Beneath his feet lay those who dared to challenge him, without even having time to understand where the blow came from. And after the battle, there was only peace and quiet, found at the foot of an ancient tree, where the sword patiently awaited a new hour. The sun slowly rolled below the horizon, painting the sky in the colors of pre-dawn hope and coming peace. And so, again in the tavern, with a cup in his hands, he listened to his new companion, as if that night's battle had never happened. He leaned over and casually looked around the room, as if checking to see if anyone was eavesdropping on their secret plans. With a sly smile, he proposed to join forces for testing, promising mutual assistance in the upcoming trials. The protagonist, not hiding his surprise, asked again, "Testing?" Because this word was new to him. The interlocutor's eyes widened in shock when he realized that his companion knew nothing. "How come you don't know?" he exclaimed, jumping up from his chair. "These are the trials of the desert fortress." He began to passionately explain that the desolate fortress was not an ordinary sect, but a place where knowledge in literature, martial arts, and much more was tested. That's why, he said, the city was full of people eager to pass these mysterious tests. He added that the fortress provides an opportunity for everyone to learn, regardless of their previous experience, which is why it attracts masters. The protagonist listened silently, realizing that many were ready to do anything just to get a chance to pass this selection. Probably every action, every thought of theirs should be as pure and precise as these movements of their hands over a bowl of water. The interlocutor continued, quoting an ancient proverb, "Do you wish to conquer the world with only one blade? Go to the desert fortress." He scorned the fools who exalted the traditional sects without understanding the true power of the fortress. How can commoners compete with those who are capable of creating an empire? He chuckled, and our hero simply replied calmly, "I understand." The interviewee reminded that almost no one manages to pass the trials on the first try, and when asked, "And?" he simply shrugged. Only 1 in 1,000, and only the heirs of great clans were granted this honor, leaving the rest behind. The protagonist only sipped his tea, accepting the bitter truth about the harsh trials. His comrade could not hide his confusion at seeing such calm. "You might be a little confused, but just repeat after me," came the voice against the backdrop of the majestic city walls. Meanwhile, battle flags proudly fluttered above the walls, foreshadowing the trials to come. Under their shadow, 4 travelers headed towards the giant gates leading to the very heart of the trials. With a firm determination in his eyes, the protagonist gave a sign, calling his companions forward. His gaze, usually calm, now glowed with a hidden fire, reflecting an internal struggle. The huge fortress city seemed to silently watch each new contender. The hero received his plaque confirming his serial number, 13. Without taking his eyes off the carved tablet, he simply nodded, accepting his fate. His gaze slid over those around him, assessing potential rivals, each of whom carried their own story. A variety of personalities gathered around, their tense faces betraying nervous anticipation. The stern examiners, motionless as statues, had already taken their places, ready to begin. On a large area marked out with a complex pattern, the announcement of the conditions for the first test began. The herald explained in a stern voice, success meant that the tablet would be taken away. Failure meant that it would have to be returned. The second stage, as announced, was a grueling tournament where everyone had to prove their strength. Without wasting any time, the hero immediately inquired about the details of the final stage. His comrade, putting his finger to his lips, hinted at something quite unexpected. The answer was something that amazed even the protagonist, a personal audience with the head of the desert fortress himself. This revelation elicited only a short but understanding sigh from the friends. There are martial artists who come to this city just for this one chance. After all, a conversation with the head of the fortress is not just an audience. It is a hope for a grain of wisdom, for invaluable advice. The protagonist seems to have already realized the full gravity and importance of this opportunity. He silently accepted the issued token, a symbol of his admission to the tests. And so a voice announced the beginning of the first exam, a demonstration of the art of swordsmanship. Each was required to demonstrate one single swing, the fastest technique he knew, and the mentor himself will observe and evaluate every movement. Before he could finish, one of the young men, full of enthusiasm, volunteered to be the first. The mentor nodded only slightly, accepting his enthusiasm. The boy, although he was nervous, thought that it was enough to simply show off his fast technique. He stepped forward resolutely under the watchful gaze of everyone present. He drew his blade with a clear sound, and the air around him seemed to become electrified. Our hero watched him with undisguised interest, feeling the growing tension. Suddenly, a blue aura flared up around the young man, revealing his hidden power. Even he himself was amazed, feeling within himself a power that surpassed even the most ferocious bandits he had ever seen. And then, with a sudden impulse, he rushed forward, drawing his sword with lightning speed. The air split with a deafening whistle, leaving behind a whirlwind of energy. His strike was clean and swift, the sword stopping at the top point, completing the movement. The audience was stunned. Some did not even have time to understand what had happened, struck by the extraordinary energy. A chill ran down everyone's spine. This was an incredible level, setting an extremely high bar for those who followed. The master seemed pleased with what he saw, and with a slight smile of approval, he gave his verdict. Not bad, his words were heard, and now he was demanding the young swordsman's tablet to write down his assessment. The young swordsman, beaming with joy, merely threw out an encouraging, "Good luck," to the next person in line. His gaze, full of determination, slowly slid across the horizon, foreshadowing an imminent storm. And so, with each measured step, a new contender in red robes stepped into the arena, attracting the attention of the crowd. "So this young man has finally decided to take the exams," whispered the crowd, watching his confident appearance. "This young swordmaster certainly has guts," another spectator said with some mockery, assessing the newcomer. The crowd whispered, "If he's from another province, where else would he get the chance to show off his skills in front of the master of the desolate fortress himself? Even just one piece of advice from him would be invaluable." His steps stopped, and the whole world seemed to stop with him. Finally, he stopped, a few steps away from the master, and a tense silence hung between them, like a harbinger of a great duel. With a deep bow, he expressed his respect, preparing to accept the challenge. The master nodded in response, silently giving permission. "Begin," said the master's voice, and at that very moment the air around the young man thickened, as if filled with an invisible force. With a sharp pop, the blade left its sheath, and waves of azure energy spread across the ground around it. A powerful whirlwind shook the space, and fragments of something invisible flew in all directions, almost hitting the spectators. Even the imperturbable master couldn't help but look slightly surprised. The crowd held its breath, and every spectator's eyes widened in shock, not believing what they had just seen. And he, with an inscrutable expression, only gripped the hilt of the sword tighter, as if this was only the beginning. When did the sword appear?" one of the youths muttered, his voice trembling with bewilderment and fear. The master looked at him, and as the swordsman calmly sheathed his blade, he spoke words that echoed throughout the arena. "The future of the desert fortress is right here." Bewilderment and shock swept across the faces of those gathered as the master's words about the future of the desert fortress hung in the air. And so, returning to everyday life, the manager asked the young man to present his registration badge. After carefully examining the wooden plaque, he said quietly, as if checking something in his memory, Number 13. His gaze, sharp and penetrating, slid over the swordsman's figure, trying to guess the hidden depth. "Keep to your path," said the steward, and the youth, clutching his scabbard tightly, merely nodded briefly. "Next!" a loud cry broke the silence, as the swordsman barely turned around and walked away, leaving a slight confusion in his wake. The arena was once again filled with the next contender, who stepped confidently onto the sand, but whose gaze involuntarily lingered on the departing figure. Are you perhaps the son of a famous family?" the newcomer asked with some apprehension, trying to solve the young man's riddle. He just chuckled. "Does that change anything? I heard that after entering the fortress, only martial arts matter." The young man's words echoed in the mind of his interlocutor, causing him to realize with surprise the seriousness of his intentions. "Isn't that what everyone came here for? And you want it yourself too?" the swordsman added, challenging him. The young man froze, absorbed by a sudden thought, thinking deeply about these words. "Yes, it's true," he finally said, nodding as if accepting the invisible truth. Bowing deeply, he expressed his gratitude before quietly leaving. He walked away, leaving the swordsman standing in the middle of the arena, his eyes following him as his thoughts wandered to the trials to come. Later, in the privacy of his room, the young man fell into meditation, a blue glow enveloping him, a sign of inner strength. His thoughts were on the second exam, the grand tournament where his skills would be put to the final test. His fingers settled on the hilt of his sword, preparing for the battles to come, for the challenge that lay ahead. And now he is a whirlwind of movement, two blades dancing in his hands, filled with power that pierces the air. The setting sun caressed the tiled roofs, but within the walls of his abode, the light of swords was only just beginning its journey. The dawn of a new day was already rising above the ancient spires, promising clear skies, but not peace. Step by step, the group approached the majestic gates, among which stood out a young man with a serene yet focused gaze. Inside, before entering the monastery, they were met by a stern voice ordering everyone else to wait until called. And while everyone froze in respectful anticipation, only one, dressed in white robes, silently walked further through the sun-drenched courtyard. The creaking gates closed behind him, leaving behind dozens of faces on which mixed feelings were visible, from hope to undisguised envy. One of them, crossing his arms over his chest, could not hide his disappointment, as if sensing the injustice of what was happening. Another whispered that the white robes, although symbolic of the initial level, did not explain the power that emanated from this young man. After all, how to explain such enormous energy, he wondered, until someone nearby noticed that the white form itself signified a promising future. The young man in red's gaze was piercing and thoughtful, as if he was trying to unravel the mystery of who was hiding behind that confident gate. Suddenly, a cheerful voice broke the silence of the courtyard. "Young Master Chong!" calling out to the same young man in red. A friendly gesture and a light joke about how his friend had grown up eased the tension. But questions continued to hang in the air. A playful fist on the shoulder, full of genuine joy, only momentarily distracted them from the expectations hovering around them. The young man who came in white robes towered over them, and his words slowly began to penetrate everyone's consciousness. He reminded that winning this test is not the most important thing, because the true goal lies much deeper than a simple battle. It is enough to participate in just one battle to be noticed by one of the great masters of the desert fortress, who are closely following the progress of the tournament. But does that mean that even 2 victories don't guarantee progression? Young Chan asked in amazement, realizing the complexity of the system. And therein lies the rub, they explained to him, because today the exam administrator's demands would be far higher than usual. But why? Asked Chan. His interlocutor, pursing his lips, leaned closer to share shocking news that could change all their plans. He heard that the White Qilin from the legendary Namgung clan was also participating in today's desolate fortress trials. And this wasn't just a rumor. A young warrior who had destroyed bandits before the age of 15 and beheaded a master from an unconventional sect had come here to issue a challenge. The words reached the ears like a whisper on the wind. This youth, White Qilin, at the age of 18, had already defeated the best fighters of the Dragon and Phoenix tournament. Then why was he such a renowned scion of the Namgung clan, looking for something in the desert fortress? The reason was simple and as ancient as the world itself. Born of a concubine, he was deprived of the right to leadership in the family. But the desolate fortress, the position of its lord granted power comparable to the strength of the 8 great families, surpassing the influence of any clan head. It held the order of the entire Jianghu in its mighty embrace, pulsating in the very heart of the Central Plains. And those eyes, full of hidden fire, were looking for exactly that, true power and undeniable influence. Suddenly, a loud and clear voice broke the silence of the hall. "Nanyang, Henan Province, Xinei County, Zhongyong, please come out." The resulting confusion only emphasized the determination in the eyes of the future hero. Not a shadow of doubt, only grace and strength in every curve of his young face. He glanced back briefly, his words a farewell and a promise. "I hope we meet again, here in the desert fortress." His interlocutor could only watch him leave in amazement. With each confident step, he moved further away, leaving behind the surprised exclamations of the crowd. A whisper ran through the crowd, and faces distorted into grimaces of worry and curiosity. All eyes were on the departing figure, aware of the magnitude of the test ahead. One of them, a gray-haired warrior, slowly and with a sinister glint in his eyes, drew his blade. Namgung Seo, the White Qilin, turned around, meeting the challenge with unperturbed calm. A loud cry rang out, "Begin!" And the arena came to life, preparing for battle. The gray-haired opponent leaned over, a hoarse laugh escaping from his throat in anticipation of the fight. This laughter, full of contempt, echoed throughout the hall, but only caused confusion to appear on Namgung's face. "You must be in despair," the old man croaked. "You don't know your place in this world, like a moth drawn to a flame." "And who am I, you ask?" But his arrogance quickly turned into a cry of pain when Namgung, not letting him finish, pierced his chest with a powerful blow, throwing the old man aside. The body, like a sack, crashed into the stone wall, bouncing off it with a dull thud. Namgung stood, calm and unwavering, as the life slowly drained from the eyes of his fallen opponent. The sword in his hand did not tremble. Only the blood on the blade testified to the instant and merciless reprisal. And only a slight smile touched his lips, confirming complete control over the situation. The old man, who had been filled with pride just a minute ago, was now just a bloody doll, helplessly sliding down. His henchmen rushed to him, but it was too late. The sentence had been passed and carried out. The crowd of witnesses stood dumbfounded as Namgung, without even glancing at his fallen opponent, calmly turned around and walked away. One of them, with a predatory gleam in his eyes, watched this spectacle with undisguised interest. A step full of determination broke the silence of the frozen courtyard. "Can I try?" a voice called out, challenging Namgung, who turned around in surprise. It was a young man with eyes full of hidden strength and playful insolence. Namgung just looked at him silently, assessing the new contender. The courtyard once again became an arena, this time for a new, intriguing confrontation. "Finally," someone from the crowd whispered, anticipating what would happen next. The conversations grew louder. Some wondered who would now gain the upper hand, while others acknowledged Namgung's obvious power. "Nothing else could be expected from Namgung," said another, and the blue-haired boy next to him merely nodded. But suddenly his gaze changed. Realization filled his eyes as the name came out. "Namgung? Could this guy be the White Qilin, Namgung Huaxin?" he said in disbelief, looking at the smiling youth, ready for a new fight. The spectators held their breath, anticipating whether this day would witness the legendary Boundless Heavens technique. Namgung Huaxin looked at his opponent appraisingly, noting his age, but not feeling any overwhelming superiority. The enemy, Jin Mu Wan, acknowledged his physical strength, which was superior to his opponent, but he sensed subtle edges in which he could be more dangerous. The sound of a blade being drawn cut through the growing tension in the room, setting the stage for a fight. The White Qilin, Namgung Huaxin, introduced himself, naming his clan and mentioning his mastery of secret techniques. With a slight, almost condescending smile, he formally greeted his future opponent. Jin Muwan responded by simply stating his own style, his eyes never leaving his opponent's blade. Namgung frowned slightly when he didn't hear the name, but his gaze remained sharp and attentive. Then, Jin Muwan asked a question that might have seemed offensive, but was merely a statement of fact. In response to this, Muwan's fingers slowly, almost gracefully, lay on the hilt of his own sword. With the speed of lightning, the blade slid out of its sheath, flashing in the semi-darkness of the hall. His gaze, previously calm, was now full of determination and unbending will. Namgung, in turn, only nodded, his smile growing wider, foreshadowing a fierce battle. And then his own blade flared with a blinding radiance, enveloped in streams of internal energy. A stream of energy rushed from him, and a shadow of a barely perceptible thought ran across his face. Meanwhile, Muwan was pondering the main principle of his new technique, which he had developed over many months. Energy coursed through their bodies, filling every muscle, every nerve, preparing them to explode. Namgung, seeing this power before him, was already thinking of a strategy to break the enemy's defense. But Muwan's eyes burned with an indomitable fire, reflecting the determination to stand to the end. And as if on command, a cry rang out from the crowd, cutting through the silence. "Let's begin!" From the very first second, the air sparkled from the collision of two blades, a furious dance of steel and flesh, where every blow could be the last. Muwan's face was contorted with tension. The will to win was visible in every muscle. And then, with a deafening ringing, Muwan's blade could not withstand the onslaught, shattering into pieces. The moment stood still as the dust settled, revealing the shocking truth. Muwan stood clutching only a broken hilt, while Namgung Huaxin held the perfect blade. The crowd roared, acknowledging the victory of Namgung Huaxin and his legendary White Qilin. Disbelief and numbness gripped the faces of the spectators, amazed by the speed of the fight. Namgung Huaxin sheathed his sword, casting a look of cold-blooded confidence at Muwan. Muwan just silently looked at his broken blade, a symbol of crushing defeat. And then, with a dignity bordering on humility, he said the words no one expected to hear. "I lost." Even Namgung Huaxin faltered for a moment, taken aback by such an immediate confession. Shock again gripped the crowd, this time from words rather than from actions, raising a murmur of bewilderment. One of the masters in admiration whispered about young Zhong Yun-shin and his frightening, admirable fighting spirit. He doesn't even use true energy? Someone whispered, realizing the extent of his hidden potential. All eyes were now on Zhong Yun-shin, the one who seemed to be hiding a true master under the guise of an ordinary warrior. It was scary to imagine what power he would have when he reached his peak. Namgung Hua-shin himself, with a slight smile, addressed Muon by name, confirming his name as Jung-un-shin. Then, pointing into the distance, he gave a strange instruction that broke the atmosphere of the duel. "Go to the northern garden and wait there," he said, looking forward to their next meeting. His opponent, with a slight smile, expressed similar anticipation, promising a next meeting. But in his gaze, there was a determination that was deeply rooted in his consciousness. While others were pondering what had happened, he was already considering his next steps. Step by step, he left the place of the duel, heading towards the indicated northern garden. The other participants watched him leave, puzzled by the meaning of what was happening. One of them, watching with a mysterious smile, seemed to understand something more. The opponent's thoughts revolved around his age and incredible achievement, as a completely different winner was expected. Each of his steps echoed, becoming a milestone on the path to a new awareness. Deep down, he knew that a protracted battle was doomed to failure. So, from the very first seconds, he unleashed all his might on the enemy. But the incredible power of Namgung Hua-shin's true energy proved destructive to his own blade. It was a defeat caused by a reckless attempt to use a power he did not yet fully understand. And yet, despite the obvious, the opponent admitted defeat, maintaining surprising calm. Spectators, stunned by the outcome, wondered why the young man's performance seemed incomplete, as if he had not reached his full potential. His clan, only a third-rate branch, could not give him knowledge of such advanced techniques. They were unavailable within his home walls. But now, faced with it, he realized the truth that had previously been hidden. Realization came only when he saw his own mistakes and understood the depth of someone else's skill. His hand gripped the sword, and a blue glow of true energy began to pulse around the blade. "I understand," flashed through his thoughts. "This is not just an investment of energy. It is something more. It is a way to become one with your sword, to merge with it in perfect harmony." And he felt the flow of true energy pass into the blade, making it an extension of himself. And then a powerful surge of true energy burst out, shaking everyone around. An aura of mystical light enveloped him, spreading across the ancient slabs of the courtyard. A look of genuine amazement, bordering on disbelief, flashed in the elder's eyes. Another warrior watched in bewilderment at the unprecedented display of force. "Resonance with the sword?" The silent question hung in the air as the flow of energy swirled around him. "Impossible," whispered someone's soul, unable to believe what it saw. "He's too young for such skill," was the thought that echoed in the glow of his sword. He hovered in the epicenter of this miracle, like a spirit that had found its true place. Every curl of energy, every ray of light was an extension of his will, his enlightenment. His eyes were closed, immersed in the depths of the inner world where this power was born. And then the eyelids fluttered, revealing a gaze full of new, peaceful wisdom. A light but deep smile appeared on his lips, a sign of a completed journey. The blade returned smoothly to its sheath, and his friend Chan looked at it with understanding. Namgung's gaze wandered, as if he was trying to unravel something hidden, unsaid. Meanwhile, Chang was also completing his preparations, slowly lowering his sword. Namgung suddenly realized, could it be that he has been protecting me all this time, afraid that someone would interfere with my enlightenment? And words of gratitude, simple and sincere, escaped his lips. "I didn't know. Thank you." He looked questioningly at Chan, anticipating the continuation of the conversation. "Congratulations on successfully passing the Desert Fortress test, Namgung," Zheng said solemnly. Namgung nodded in response, and their mutual congratulations were filled with deep respect. Zheng leaned towards Namgung curiously, bringing an unexpected twist to their serious conversation. "A nickname?" Namgung's thoughts immediately raced, trying to understand the meaning of these words, but he only asked again, puzzled. But there was no secret about how these fortress walls remembered him. It would seem that Namgung had only completed another test, but the echo of his exploits was already thundering throughout the desert fortress. Lightning Genius, the new name sounded, and Namgung's gaze froze for a moment. In that flash of lightning, in every honed movement of the sword, this nickname was born, which stuck with him with inexorable force. Chan explained that if even the stern masters of the desert fortress unanimously named him that, then that says something. This means that Namgung's nickname, Lightning Genius, has already become an integral part of his name in Jianghu. But Namgong, doubting his own importance, only shook his head, suggesting that it could have been a simple joke. A little clever? The master asked indignantly, pointing out Namgong's modesty as something completely unthinkable. As the sun lit up the sky and the wind rustled the leaves, Namgong silently pondered what these words actually meant.